Hey everybody, welcome back to day 6 of Colt's Corner summer virtual camp. Of course, we've spent the last 6 days looking at, or 5 days, looking at a lot of different math concepts and practicing those using games and just reviewing some common math terms and things that'll help us be good strategic problem solvers. So today we're going to add to our nice little bag of goodies, and we're going to talk about measurement, and we're also going to learn a new game with area, which will help us to practice our mental math strategies as far as multiplication, but also give us some other tools in our tool belt to help us coming into 4th grade or even going on to 5th grade. So one of the things, we'll start with measurement today, and we'll talk about what are some tools that we use to measure with. I'd like for you to think about some things that you might have around your house or something you might see in the classroom that you would use, tools that you would use to measure. They don't always have to be a standard tool like a ruler or a tape measure, or for larger things we might use a yardstick. You can use common everyday objects like your dry erase marker. That can be a unit of measure. You can use your dry eraser as a unit of measure. You can use your finger, So what's the difference between using a ruler to measure and a dry erase marker to measure? Well, you've probably talked about this in math in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, maybe even 1st grade. When we use a ruler, we're going to use units of measure. On this ruler, we have units of measure. You have 2 sides to this ruler, and one side is using centimeters to measure. If we flip it over, the other side uses inches to measure. So when we have a ruler to measure with, or we have a tape measure, same thing again. On my tape measure, I have inches and centimeters. Then I'm going to have units that have been created to find exact measures. When we don't have exact measures, when we use something like this dry expo marker or your dry eraser, to measure, then you use that as a common unit, but we don't really have a measurement or a number to attach to that measurement. So depending on what your reason is for measuring, I remember when I was a little girl, this is kind of a fun story, my dad would just step off a tobacco bed or step off the area of a space so that he'd have a estimate of how much or how long or how wide something was. And he knew that his stride was about 3 feet, so his stride was about as long as a yardstick. So he would use that as an estimating tool. So when you have to make an estimate, then you can just use something that has a length and you repeat it many times. So here we go talking about patterns again. Finding a repeated pattern with a non-standard unit. Then if he needed to have that exact measure, then he'd take out his measuring tape if it was a long place, or he would take out his yardstick and to find that exact measure. So we use standard units of measure and non-standard units to help us in measuring objects. What are some of those units that we talk about? We talk about length and width and height, and we'll use rulers to do that. But we can also have measurements of capacity, like if you have spent any time baking this summer, then you probably used cups and teaspoons. If you were going to make a gallon of tea, then that is another standard unit of measure, and it's a capacity measurement. Most of what we use in the United States and what you use every day would be inches, feet, yards for units of measure in length, and then for capacity you would use gallons, cups, pints, quarts. So those are all units of measure that we'll use. But for our purposes and what we'll be doing, you'll just be using a ruler, and that's been included in your math kit. And then when we look at our ruler, let's talk about some of the ways that it's divided. All right, so it has 12 equal parts, and each part is 1 inch. And when you add those up in a repeating pattern, then it adds up to 12 inches. Within each of those equal parts, there are smaller parts that make up the whole. So here we can talk a little bit about how we divide 1 inch into equal parts and how many equal parts are between 0 and 1. So then we start talking about parts of the whole. So it lends itself to fractions, which is what we'll start exploring tomorrow. And we'll be doing fractions tomorrow and Thursday. So that's a great way to take a look, you know, because one half of this you would be dividing 1 into 2 parts, and so each would be equal to 1/2. And then it even divides it into fourths and eighths and sixteenths on some rulers. And I don't know if that would be true on the ruler that's in your kit, but I know for certain that you would have 1/2, 1/4, 1/8. And the way you would find out is that you could count those little tick marks on your ruler. And if there are 16 of those little marks to get to the 1, then 16 sixteenths is equal to 1 whole. And you would have 16 sixteenths between each of these. And that'll be useful for you tomorrow. But for today's purposes, let's just talk about using the ruler. So some things that you're going to need to remember is that you're always, when you're measuring, especially for today's activity when we do the game, you'll want to always place your ruler. If I wanted to measure this dry erase marker, then I would place the edge of the dry erase marker at 0. And then I would take the measurement where the other end or the tip of that dry erase marker ends. Okay, so I would make that measurement about right there. It looks like to this little first part it's about 4.5 inches, and inches are units, and units are very important. That's part of your math language. Okay, so when we're talking math, you want to make sure that you say those units. If I ask you how long is the dry erase marker, you need to say about 4.5 inches. If you said about 4.5, then I would wonder, well, 4.5 elephants or 4.5 lizards? None of those are math words. They're not part of our math vocabulary. But inches, that's a word we recognize, and we have a picture in our mind of what 4 inches looks like. Okay, so again, taking that visual and recognizing, creating a picture in your mind about what that that measurement looks like. Okay, so you can spend some time today, use your ruler and measure several things around your house. Measure how long they are, how tall they are, how short they are, and use those to create visual pictures in your mind of what 1 inch looks like. Even if you measured your finger, you know, you can use that as a visual, is that my knuckle, from my first knuckle to the tip of my finger, is about 1 inch. So that's about 1 inch right there. So figure out about what's 1 inch for you on your finger. So use your ruler today and find some fun things to measure and write some of those down. You can even tag me in some comments on our dojo, class dojo, so that I can see the work that you're doing. Have some fun with it, and we'll see you again tomorrow.